Hey guys, it's Robo and I'll just be walking you through the Feral Opener for 7.3.5 if you're playing Lunar Inspiration, Behemoths and Sota. The first thing I'll walk you through is how the opener goes if you don't get any procs from tier 21. There's really just 3 variations, whether you get 2 combo points, 3 combo points or 4 combo points at the start. You open with Rake and Moonfire into Savage Roar. This affects your finisher order, but the rest of the casts are the same. You can see at the 14th, 22nd and 26th cast into Incarnation, there's different options based on how many combo points you started with before you cast Savage Roar at the start. So here it is at speed. You can see basically just following what's been stated on the left hand side. You can have a comparison of them, they're just all lined up. One of the keys for the Incarn opener is to make sure you cast 3 generators for every finisher, which you can see has obviously been done here. If you just wanted to know the opener without wondering why everything is as it is, you can just stop here and memorize that list on the left. If you want to simplify it even further, you can just always cast Savage Roar when you are on that 14th ability of Incarnation. Next I'll talk about how to deal with procs. If you get a proc after the 22nd ability inside Incarn, basically you just drop a shred off the end of the last finisher and you go shred shred rake instead of triple shred rake. You may also have to adjust where your Moonfire fits. For example, you might have cast it 1 GCD earlier. You want to make sure that when you do have the proc, you do not waste any combo points except for at the very last GCD when you refresh Rake. As you can see, if there is a proc just at the end, there is not much change at all. If you get a proc between the 14th and 20th ability, basically you'll extend your Tiger's Fury by 2.5 seconds, which will get you close enough to do another finisher, so you'll actually extend your Tiger's Fury by 5 seconds. This will mean that your last Moonfire within Incarn will actually be buffed. You may have to move your Moonfire around slightly earlier to make sure it gets inside the Tiger's Fury. Note that if you get your Ferocious Bite proc on the 14th, you actually need to shred once in order to cast the free Ferocious Bite. If you get a proc before the 14th ability, basically the 14th finisher, which would have been a Ferocious Bite, should fit within the 15-second Berserk buff where you deal 20 to 35% extra damage. It's listed here as the Greedy FB. If you do get that, make sure that you allow ample time for your Savage Roar and Rip to be refreshed, especially if you're on 3 combo points. If you get a second proc, you may have to hold that Ferocious Bite until after you refresh Savage Roar, because otherwise your Savage Roar will drop momentarily. That's pretty much all you need to know in terms of how to execute. If you want to look at the theory crafting behind it, you can go ahead and stick around. The reason you cast 2 generators before Savage Roar is because you want to get out of the Incarn 20 to 35% damage phase without casting Savage Roar again. Also, if you only cast 1 generator, then you might get stuck with 1 combo point, which is very bad since it will mean you have to refresh Savage Roar within the Ashmane's Frenzy buff. So 2 to 4 combo points, 2 guaranteed, 3 getting you out of the Incarn and AF, it's pretty good. The next thing is after you cast your Savage Roar, you want to get Rip up as soon as possible. You can do a 2 generator finisher using AF and guaranteed Shred Grid with Incarn. That will get your Rip up using AF Shred Rip. Now the reason you should cast Tiger's Fury after Ashmane's Frenzy is that Ashmane's Frenzy is a channeled dot. If you cast Tiger's Fury after Ashmane's Frenzy, you still get more than 95% of that 15% damage buff on the AF, and you also get a 15% damage buff on another ability inside Incarnation. The next question people usually ask me is why Rake after Rip? This assumes you're not running Jungle Stalker, as in you're not going to stealth as the 31st Incarn ability, because that can break on damage. If you are going to do that, then it's recommended that you rake here because you're going to rake anyway, and doing so will pretty much mean that all your rakes are going to be lined up for the first 3 minutes if you play very tight. The next technical question is what actually fits within the rest of Ashmane's Frenzy. Ashmane's Frenzy lasts 10 seconds on the target, but after the player casts it, it takes about 0.2 to 0.3 seconds to actually appear on the mob. That means you can fit 10 on GCD abilities. So you can see that you can fit 3 finishes. On your subsequent incarnations, you can actually fit 3 Ferocious Bites instead of the Rip. But both the Ferocious Bites fit within Ashmane's Frenzy if you play very tight. After you finish your Ashmane's Frenzy, you want to refresh Moonfire, which will have 1 second left. If you do get a proc before then Moonfire will actually just be falling off, so you won't actually lose any uptime on Moonfire. And you want to put that up because it does more damage than a Shred on average. The next 2 events are basically finisher selections. You want to get that Ferocious Bite with the 20 to 35% damage buff if you can, instead of refreshing Rip. And Rip is actually refreshed on the 18th ability within Pandemic, within Tiger's Fury, as is the Rake that's cast immediately after it. Now, the last Moonfire refresh is a bit questionable as to whether it will deal more damage than a Stealth Shred, as in, are you giving up too much for it? Usually, if you open with Bloodlust, the Moonfire will do extra damage and it will be worth it. But that's probably the one that's most up in there, whether you should Shred again towards the end of Incarn instead of refreshing Moonfire, then refresh Moonfire outside of Incarn. Finally, probably the last important bit is casting Rake as your last GCD. If you do have an Incarn cast tracker, like I do, it's linked below in the description, then you do want to refresh the Rake, because the double damage Rake does significant amounts of damage, even more than, say, a Ferocious Bite, which you could just delay and cast as the next GCD anyway. That concludes my video on the opener. If you like it, feel free to subscribe or sign the petition to get me unbanned from Dreamgrove.